Welcome back for Volume 2 of our Sketchup for Web video, and this time I'd like to go over some of the more advanced tools. And like we found in the beginning video, a lot of these tools are really very similar to that you'll find in AutoCAD. I'm just going to pan over here so I have a little space. And to get the kind of wider panoply of tools, you do have to click the little 3-dot link at the bottom of your tool palette, and you'll see a couple of different things. First of all, some we've already seen, the circles, and of course various flavors of arc. But let's try one of these other tools. There's a polygon tool. Let's start with that. And again, the icon that you see will indicate kind of how it works. Click once is the black dot, click again is the red dot. And when you click the tool, you'll see a polygon connected to your cursor, and you can just type in the number of sides. If you take a look down at the lower right of your screen, here you'll see that it has entered 8 instead of the default 6, which is the value that you normally have. And then you can just click and draw your object, and you can also have some options like with other tools, control to inscribe versus circumscribed, and there you go, you have yourself an object. Now, fun fact is even circles, and I'm just going to go over here and start my circle tool. Circles also are basically polygons. If you look in the lower right in the value box here, you'll see it has 24 sides, and I'm going to, just for demonstration purposes, make it 12 and enter, and you can see it's actually quite faceted. So if I go and type the circle tool again, but say make this number 50, you'll see that it's much smoother. Okay, it is still a polygon, but it is much smoother. Now you might be saying, wow, what happened to the lines? Where did they go? Well, they were smoothed. There's actually a smoothing feature. And if you want to see the lines that were disappeared, just click on the eyeglasses button. This is your display palette, and you'll see there's an object for hidden geometry, and in fact it even looks just like a extruded polygon with lines. I'll turn that on, and there they are. If I wanted to smooth another object, I could right-click on it, and down at the bottom of this palette, this view palette, there's options for smoothing the edges, and you can even smooth coplanar, and you can kind of control how smoothy it is. So I can get rid of the side edges, and then I can even get rid of the top edges. If I go back and turn off that hidden geometry, now the object really looks kind of, I don't know, like a lozenge or something like that. Those lines are still there, and we can unhide them by selecting them and unsmoothing them. What other fun tools are hidden under here? Well, let's see. There's the freehand tool. That's a fun one. And it does just what you think it would do. And this is one that I don't believe we have in AutoCAD. It's not very smooth, but you can draw. And if you draw back to the starting point, it will close the curve. And now you have yourself a nice smooth surface. These surfaces can be adapted and drawn, but you can't really draw on them very easily. How the rectangle doesn't take to the surface because it's actually made up of millions of little facets as you drew. A rotated rectangle, which is another tool here, does just what you think it would do. It draws a rectangle at some angle, and you can specify the angle by just typing in a number. So I could type in 45. I honestly never really find a use for this tool, but I guess if you wanted to draw a roof at a very specific angle, or a sunscreen, you might be able to use it for that. Finally, there is the 3D text tool, and this does just what you think it would do. It would write 3D text, text here. I'll type it in. You can specify how tall it is, whether or not it's filled, extrusion, all this kind of good stuff. So here, let's make it a little bigger, and click OK. And there you go, you have yourself 3D text. And this text it's just an object, it's just geometry like any other. If I click M to move, I can move it as a group. I can also rotate it using the quick rotate tools. And I can also explode it. Just right click on it and choose explode. And now I have individual letters. I can say push, pull, sum, more than others if I wanted to. I can also make these back into groups or even components if I so desired. So you do have a lot of access here to the kind of nitty-gritty inside the text tool. The one thing you can't do is change the text after it's been written. You'll have to make new text if you don't like the words. There are also a couple of really nice tools, advanced tools for modifying geometry, and these editing tools are in the next panel down here. The one that is really fun is called Follow Me, and it's kind of like push-pull, except even more fun than push-pull. And the way it works, you click the Follow Me tool. You have to have some kind of profile drawn, and I drew like a crown molding kind of profile. Click once on the profile, and it will follow your cursor. See how it's kind of following around the building? You can make it go just a short distance. If you move your mouse over the middle of the surface around which it's going, and it does have to be a single surface, hold down Alt and move your mouse, and like magic, it will actually go all the way around whatever that surface is. And generally, this will work on most types of shapes. The only problem is sometimes if you're using an irregular shape, the geometry may kind of cross over itself. So I wouldn't recommend using it on these complex shapes, or at least start simple when you do. Another handy tool is the flip tool. You're going to flip when you see this one. And you select an object first, or you can select the tool first, either way. Click the flip tool, and what you'll see is a series of planes around your object. And then you can move your mouse over each of these planes to force the object to flip along or across that axis. See how I can flip it along the blue axis. I can flip it along, or I guess that was the blue axis. I can flip it along this other axis here. And so this is a great tool, obviously not so handy for text, but a lot more fun for geometric objects where you're, say, trying to make a copy that is a mirror image of the copy. You can copy the object and mirror it like this. Great for asymmetrical furniture, that sort of thing. The other handy-dandy tool that is here in SketchUp is, or I guess are, these special solids tools. And what these are, you can take solid objects and intersect them in different ways. You can join them in a union. You can create an outer shell around irregular objects. You can intersect them so that you end up with just what's left. Trim, split, etc., etc. These are really handy if you are doing building massing or experimenting with shapes of different objects. The first thing you need is a solid, and I'm going to click on this object here and get the entity info. And when I do that, you'll see it tells me it's a group, and these do have to be a group. You can't have loose geometry to use this solids tool. But what it doesn't say is solids. If I click on this object, you'll see it says solid group. And it actually tells me how many of these groups are in the model, 8 of them. So this object will not work with this tool. I have to use these objects. And both of these are solids. And one thing, when SketchUp overlaps objects that do not connect, sticky to each other, you will see that there's no line there between the two of them. And if you have some reason that you want there to be a line, the most basic way to these objects interact is you can intersect these objects with the model. And just right-click on them and intersect with the model, and you'll see the lines pop up. And this is we're not even messing with the geometry, and this will work with non-solid objects. And you see how it actually has created a series of lines. They are independent of this object. So the lines are totally, if I were to delete this, they're just kind of in space here. But you can see that created the intersection point between these two. This is great if you have irregular non-solid geometry. But we have solid geometry, so we can use the solids tool. And let's take a look at a couple of these. The outer shell tool, it will prompt you to select the first solid and then the second solid. And what it does, you say, oh, that doesn't look all that different. But I'm going to double click on this, and maybe I'll just hide this surface. And what you'll see is that it has created kind of a solid outside of the original shapes. It has kind of removed the internal guts. And this is really handy if you want to create some 3D print or something like that, it's really nice to not have any geometry on the inside of a 3D print. Now, some of the other tools that are available in the Solids tool, let's give a try to the Intersect tool. Again, you click the first object and then the second object, and what you'll see is only what's left between those two objects. Again, this is a great way that you can create different kinds of shapes, and you can play with these other ones. You can imagine what union or subtract does. Subtract, for example, you take a first object and it will eat away a second object. And you might say, well, when am I going to use that? Well, let's say you wanted to make a barrel vault. You could draw the shape of the vault, and especially if this is an irregular shape, you might want to draw it. And then you can use the subtract tool to subtract this one from this one, this shape. Now, I want to actually make a groin vault where these cross each other. I can use the rotate tool, and just like the move tool, if you tap Control, it will make a copy of the original object. I'll copy it around 90 degrees. And now I can use my subtract tool. Subtract, because I had this one selected, it was already the first object, so I just select the second object, and there you go. And I can do the tool again. Go and click on the subtract tool, and then click on the subtract tool, and then click on the second object. And there you go. You have actually a fairly complex groin vault geometry that would be super hard to model all on its own. Talk a little bit about painting materials, and I think in our previous exercise we did actually paint, but I didn't really say how to do that, and it's pretty easy. You just click on the materials button and up pops different materials options, and it couldn't be simpler. You just click on a color and you drop it on a surface by clicking. Fun fact is you can click on one surface and paint it one material, and you can actually have the opposite side of that surface be a different material. In fact, that's the default, is one surface, one material, the opposite surface, a different material. And this is mostly handy if you have very small objects or just a simple shell building, and you don't really care too much what the interior materials are going to look like. And like with other tools, there are, of course, options. And one is if you hold down the Alt tool, you can sample a material, and that becomes the current material, and now you can paint that on other surfaces. Another fun one is if you hold down Shift, and I'm going to go and pick that green color again. If I hold down Shift, you'll see three little dots show up on your cursor. Now it will paint any material that has been painted that original color. It will repaint it the new color. And this can be really handy if you have, say, a complex project, I don't know, wood trim around the outside of a building, and you had it all blue and you want it green. You can quickly paint it all that new color. Groups pose a different sort of problem. When you paint a group, it tends to paint the entire object. So I'm going to click B for bucket, and that brings up my paint bucket, and I can paint on this group. We created this group, and it paints the entire object when you paint kind of on the outside of that group. But let's say you want to paint several surfaces, different materials, inside the group. Well, you have to double click on the group in order to edit it. So I'm just double clicking on it. And by the way, when you're working on, say, I don't know, a piece of furniture or some object in the landscape that's got a lot of other objects around it, you can hide those other objects. If you go to the display menu, looks like a pair of glasses, we saw that before, you can actually hide the rest of the model when you are editing a group or a component. You see how now that's much easier. I can easily get underneath the model and paint different surfaces quite easily. Now I can just use my paint bucket, and I can have access to these individual surfaces quite easily just by using the paint bucket. And then using my select tool, click outside of that gray area, and now we're back in the model, individual surfaces. Components also pose a special problem, and the reason is you can paint the outside of components like we did before, just clicking on the outside. But what if you wanted to have, say, all of them take the same properties? I'm going to hit Control Z to undo. Then, if you want them all to change, you do have to edit the entire component. I'm just double-clicking on it to enter inside the component. And you can select an individual surface. You can actually double-click on the surface to select it, the surface and its bounding objects, or triple-click on it to select the entire object. And I'll just paint it blue, and you see they all change. And in fact, if you change an individual surface, and I'm just going to paint one of them a different color, and here we'll paint another surface a different color, you can see that it quite quickly changes them all. Variant on this component, maybe make a copy, one thing you can do is you can make this copy unique by just right-clicking on it, and there's an option called Make Unique. And what this will do, it makes a new component, and I'll just make a couple copies here so you see that it's a component. And this one is totally different than the other one. It has a different name, basically, but it allows you to change this one in a unique manner. One fun fact about components is that when you paint them from the outside and the internal surfaces are painted the default material, which is just kind of a gray, take on whatever color you paint on it. So let's say I want to have these four objects, but I want to have each one have selected surfaces have unique colors, but I don't want to make 4 different unique components. I can just double click on one of them and select the surfaces that I want to modify, have be kind of design options. And then if you get the entity info, you'll see that it tells you what the material is, and I can just remove that material. And it says, do you want to assign the default material? And yes, I do, or I wouldn't have done that. And you see how now they all look like that kind of shape color that we have normally. Now, when I dump paint on these surfaces, the surfaces that are unpainted can be totally unique. And this is great. Again, maybe you're still experimenting with geometry. You can come back in here, modify these, and you can kind of get a variance on a theme. Finally, what if you want something more than color? I want more color. I want more options. There's a browse option here. And you can find all sorts of great materials in here. I'm not going to look at every one because of the time constraints, but you can see here that these materials are all quite robust, and they make sense for a number of different situations. So, and they aren't fully photorealistic, not until we render, but they are quite evocative of the actual material. And these materials can be edited. I did have to explode this particular group here or component to get it access to the material, but then you can just right-click on it. And materials are called textures here in SketchUp World. And you can choose position, for example, and you end up with these little kind of handles, and these allow you can rotate the material, you can kind of scale it, in any different ways. You can kind of shear it, change the position. So if you want to, say, align the edge of a brick pattern with a certain surface, and you can kind of go bananas and warp it entirely. So this is super handy as you are trying to kind of match material. And then when you're done, you just click outside of that material and it is applied. It will be a unique material, so in order to paint it onto another surface, you have to activate the paint bucket, but then hold down Alt to sample this new material, and then you can get it to paint onto other surfaces. So now that you are an expert on painting, your mission is to paint your building, all the features, the landscape around it, and you can of course paint it any which way you want. Just remember that if you want an area, say, I don't know, a little pit for sand, you would have to create new geometry for that new pit, or whatever sort of object it is. Again, just draw on your surfaces. Here's my sandbox. Now I have objects that I can paint. And if I wanted something like a surface, a frame around the sandbox, I would have to make the frame geometry so that I have something to paint. So for example, I'll tap Control to make the frame around this object. And I'll just continue making the frame, and then now I have an extra object that I can paint that's a wood material. And don't forget, when you're painting, use these techniques. I mentioned painting on the outside of a group, for example, that is all painted default material on the inside. That will paint everything. So I was pretty quickly able to paint this sandbox by just dumping paint on the outside of it, then editing the sandbox and painting just this one surface, this internal surface, the sand material. So try to be as efficient as possible and think through all of your operations. Same with this building. I dumped the shingle material on it, so everything became painted shingles, but then objects that I wanted painted differently, for example, the foundation or these components, I could come in and paint those individually by editing the component and dumping paint where appropriate. We learned last time about how to use the 3D warehouse, this wonderful collection of millions of products and other types of components we can use. In fact, any components you make, you can upload to the beautiful 3D warehouse. But anyway, we can add landscaping to our projects. I'm going to search for trees, and I'm going to go to the Models tab because products doesn't make a lot of sense for trees. Go to Models, and you should find plenty of trees. Now, SketchUp trees can be quite complicated. They have a lot of elements to them, a lot of facets. So do look for trees that don't have such a big size. This is the file size here, 1 megabyte, and this is actually the number of polygons within it. So lower file size, smaller polygons, probably better. And there's filtering techniques and there's catalogs and things like that. To load these into your model, just click download and it will import directly into your model. And like we've seen, these are components. You can double click on them to edit. I'm going to remove this extra guy. I could even paint it or other features. And you can see you can quickly make your model develop into a sort of rich panoply of design. But how do you organize your model once you've spent hours loading in dozens of people and trees and swing sets and bushes? Well, it's pretty straightforward. SketchUp has a form of layer, and they're called tags here in SketchUp, and they look a little bit like a tag that you might see on a piece of clothing. And unless you're using a template, you have to make your own tags. So I'm going to make a few tags, maybe one for landscape. You could even have one for furniture, and really any other feature that you want to organize your model by. So I've created a bunch of tags. You don't want to go overboard with the number of tags, but by all means, create enough so that you can easily hide geometry that's in your way when you're trying to create things like the interior or just mess around with the landscape. And it's quite simple. You just select the object using the Select tool and get its entity info. You can get that by right-clicking on it and choosing Entity Info, or you can click on the Entity Info box up here. And you'll see here it has some information. You could even give it a name. But the biggest one is, what tag is it? Just click on the tag button. In this case, I'm going to make this the site layer. And by all means, you can create tags for things like design options, turn on and off one option versus another. But for me, I find the basic ones are primary building elements, in particular the roof, maybe the first floor as a separate geometry. We haven't created that yet. And then things like people, cars, and trees, those should all be easy to turn on and off. And again, you just tap on the button and you'll see those objects disappear. And you can imagine this is a really easy way to work on different pieces of your project without interference from all the other stuff. So once you've gotten your project to a certain point where you kind of know the limits of how big the site is and the size of the building, it's time to save some handy-dandy views to quickly access different parts of your project. Now, view tools are under here, under the additional tools menu, you can see there's a whole bunch of them. The simplest one, the one that we usually start with, is position camera. What this does is just what you'd think. You position the kind of virtual camera of your project somewhere on your site. Now you can still scroll in and out. The camera is not a locked object. You can also use some of the other tools. By default, this one, the look around tool, is the one that pops up after the initial use of that position camera tool. There's also tools that allow you to kind of more subtly engage with your model. For instance, walk allows you to kind of scroll in and out just by clicking and dragging the left mouse button. And you can easily kind of adjust your view so that you get a nice perspective of your project. Some of the other zoom tools, zoom extents will zoom all the way out to the limits of what you can find. Sometimes if your model's getting slow, there's a tree or a rabbit somewhere about 100 miles from your main model. Zoom extents will find that. Also, zoom, this is kind of the dynamic zoom that we saw in AutoCAD. You can just click and drag your mouse to zoom in and out. If you have a view that you like, you can save it for easy access. And the way you do that is you go to the thing that looks kind of like that movie scene board that they kind of slap at the start of a movie scene. And here you'll see there's an option to add a scene. And saved views are called scenes in Sketchup world. You see it has a name for it here, and we can even rename it something like, oh, I don't know, view from south, something like that. You could describe it, which might be a little bit much. But in this properties, you'll see the things that are saved in this view. So it remembers which objects are hidden, what the active section planes are, where the axes are, shadows, all these great things. So if I click OK, and let's say I make a change, for instance, let's say I turn on shadows. I'm going to click on shadows, and over here you can just click the on-off toggle, and you'll see that we start to see some shadows in our project, and maybe we adjust the time to get a nice shadow that looks good in our view. Just close the shadows menu. Now I should be able to update this scene, and it will remember the shadow settings. Well, why is this helpful? In any number of ways. I could save a bunch of scenes with different views of my project. I could even do something like create a little daylighting study. I'm going to change the time of day here. Instead of 6:43 a.m., I'm going to make it 4:44 p.m. And I'll just close this menu. I'm going to add a new scene here, and I could even call it view from the night. But now, if I hit the play scenes animation, you should see the sun kind of arc through the sky as the day passes. Other refinements that you can make to your scene have to do with how the camera behaves. In this case, I'm going to click on the camera down arrow here, and I've positioned myself on the opposite side of the building. And what you'll see is there are three options for the way the camera works: perspective, parallel projection, and two-point perspective. Two-point perspective, let me zoom in, and I'm going to kind of look up, and you should see that the vertical lines are kind of going towards a third vanishing point. And this is typical of SketchUp. Everything is in 3D. In fact, here I'll even make it more dynamic by changing the field of view here, make an even wider field of view, which makes it more distorted. You can really see those vertical lines going towards some vanishing point up in the sky. Well, that's a little funny looking. We don't usually do that with architectural drawings. We do two-point perspective. If I click that button, you'll see that all the vertical lines have now been made to be parallel. And this does look a little bit funny, so we are going to pan our drawing up and down a little bit just to get us to a height that centers our building. And you see a good architectural perspective is going to have the building in the center and use this two-point perspective. Always use that. In addition to other things like trying to use shadows to give cues about depth and using people in your drawings. So I'm going to add this view and call it view from across the yard. And of course, I want that 2-point perspective in all of my views. So I'm going to go back to my view from the southwest. You can just click on these views and your view of the model will jump from one to the other. And I'm going to make sure that 2-point perspective is turned on. And it is now, and I should be able to update my scene no problem. You just tap the Update Active Scene button, and it will remember any of those changes that we talked about. You can also do it in the Scenes menu. One last type of view that's super handy when you're working on these projects is an axonometric view. That's usually up, seeing the project from above in parallel projection. And you see how it gets that kind of funny look to it. And if you remember parallel projection, all of the axes can be measured using scale. And this is a handy way to see an overview of your project. We frequently use these in our project. So I'm going to save a scene for the axonometric as well. Once you have an axonometric view of your project, it's easy enough to save another type of architectural view that we use all the time. And these are elevation views. And you can see here under the standard views palette here in our scenes menu, there are some standard ones that we can use. The top view, which is in our case going to give us a site plan. And always when you use these standard views, remember to pan, not to zoom. If you even rotate your model ever so slightly, it throws it off. It's no longer a strict plan view, in this case site plan. So you'll want to turn it to an angle that is a standard angle. The other thing is use your shadows sparingly. In this case, you see how this long shadow, it's a little distracting. So maybe I'll make it a little closer to midsummer to get a sharper and darker shadow before saving a scene with this view in it. And you'd want to save a site plan view. You'll also want to save elevation views, the south elevation, for example. See how I get that nice shadow line with my edge of my roof? Absolutely, when you go to the east elevation, you might find that the shadows are not quite as nice as you'd like. So adjust those shadows or just turn them off altogether. In this case, it is awfully nice to see the roof overhang with the shadow. In fact, I might even make it a little bit darker so that we get a little bit darker shadow and a little more depth cue. So save yourself scenes for all of these views, not the bottom view or the isometric view. We'll need those later when we create a reflected ceiling plan. But in the meantime, the site plan and all the elevations are good ones to save. Another standard architectural view that you should create is a transverse section. And SketchUp provides you a tool called a section plane tool. And if you've done any construction drawings, you know that symbol is the marker for a section plane. What this will do is it will cut your model away in whichever direction you choose. And you can see as I move my mouse over, that section plane is orienting to whatever it finds. I can also force it to go in a particular direction by clicking either the left arrow, which goes in the green direction, the right arrow, which goes in the red direction, or the blue arrow, which will cut away the top of the building. I'm going to click the right arrow, and I'm going to just click right in the middle of the roof here. And you can see, there we go. We have created a section of our model. And I'll go to the west elevation view, and there you go. You have yourself a lovely section of your model. In fact, SketchUp even fills in the poche for you where it can detect thickness in the walls, roofs, or floors. So save yourself a section view. One thing to be aware of, by the way, when you save that section view is that the section planes are visible here in this view. That's a different thing than the cuts themselves. You can turn on and off a cut by basically double-clicking on the section plane. You see how it turns it on or off. In fact, you can even move the section plane just using the Move tool. It's an object like any other, and you can see how it behaves differently depending on where it's cutting through your building. I don't like to see that in my saved scenes. I find it a little confusing. Also, they sometimes get a little dark. So click the Display button, and you can actually tell SketchUp to not show those section planes. You see how they go away, and that actually makes a much nicer view. So I'm going to go put this into my west elevation view and save my transverse section. And by the way, be aware that when you make your new section, in all likelihood, when you click OK, it's going to give you a style update warning. And what this means, styles are the way that SketchUp remembers a number of visual settings in your drawing, and we'll get to that in a little while. But in the meantime, the thing it means is that because I turned off the visibility of those section planes, it wants to know, do I want that to be true for all of my saved scenes? And in this case, yes, I do. I'm going to update the current style. Sometimes you'll want to make a new style if you have particular things that you want to see in some views and not others. But in this case, I want them all to hide those section planes, so I'll update the current style. And what you'll see is if I go to any of my other scenes, hopefully, I won't see those section planes active at all. Creating a floor plan view works exactly the same way. You use your section plane. I'll click the up arrow just to make sure that it doesn't go in any random direction. And then you can even snap to a particular position, a point in the building if you want. 3 feet off the main floor is typically where you cut those floor plans. Once again, I don't want to see those section planes. I do want it to be in a top view. And I think I'm going to turn off things like the site and the people and the landscaping, because I don't really need to see those for an interior floor plan. Instead, you just want a nice clean view of your project. It is a little weird to have shingles painted on the floor, but we will fix that when we start working on the interior of our project. Creating an interior perspective is not all that different than creating an exterior perspective. You basically just want to go inside the building. Now, I could scroll inside the building, but I don't like not having such precise control of my position, so I'm going to choose the walk tool. Now, one thing you will find when you walk in SketchUp is that it doesn't like to walk through walls or objects. So if you look down at the bottom, there is a keyboard shortcut, a mode, which allows you to walk through walls. Wish I had that in reality. And now I'm just clicking and dragging my mouse, and I can walk through the wall. I can use look around to look inside the model. And finally, I am in 2-point perspective, but I'm not seeing a whole lot of interior here, this weird interior that's painted with shingles, and that's because I don't have a very wide field of view. And what you can do, you can manipulate the field of view. It will get quite distorted, but this is pretty typical of interiors. They do tend to be have a wide field of view, which does lead to some distortion. Anyway, you set that view and save a scene, and you have yourself an interior view. Now we get to see a few of the little hidden problems in our SketchUp model. If I orbit my model ever so slightly, you see how I'm getting this weird broken glass look to my ceiling. And the reason you're getting that is, or I'm getting that, is because of surfaces, 2 surfaces being on top of each other. And if you remember, let me go to my tags, and I'm going to turn off the building. I have a whole roof already made up here, and then I have a whole building which is below that roof. So the building has a top to it. And I need to get rid of that top because I don't want 2 surfaces on top of each other. And all you do, you just double click on the building, select the surface you don't like, and delete it. And there you go. You've got yourself gotten rid of the Z-fighting. I think I have my hide rest of model feature turned on. Oh, there we go. Now I see the underside of the roof, which is a kind of dull gray. So anytime you have 2 surfaces on top of each other, you'll get that Z-fighting issue. You have to choose which surface is going to remain and which gets deleted. Painting the interior is basically very similar to painting anything else. I can double-click on the building and use my paint bucket. And I think I'm just going to use a simple color here to paint the walls. And obviously, I have to look around and see this back wall here. Whoops, click the look around tool and paint the back wall. Again, I'm using the B keyboard shortcut for paint bucket. One little thing to be aware of is now you have, because of the way we modeled things, we have a roof surface here. I'm just going to double click on it to these roof surfaces. They actually protrude outside the building. So you are going to want to just paint the interior And let me turn off the rest of the building so you can see what I mean. This roof overhang sticks out 6 inches beyond the building. We want it to just paint inside the building. So let me turn this on, select this surface, and choose Intersect Faces with Model. And what you should see, again, I'll turn off the building, is now it has divided up this surface. I have just an interior surface here, and I should be able to paint that any material that I like. I just have to make sure to do that with the other side as well. Other objects which will give you troubles are things like windows and doors if they have glass in them. Remember, we painted this window as a component. We painted one side glass, but we didn't paint the inside glass. Oops, that's a mirror. Let's paint it. I don't remember which glass we used, maybe translucent gray. Now we can see outside, and again, these windows are the same. This glass needs to be painted on both sides in order for the window to be transparent. Okay, so I have really been ignoring one basic fact that is a problem with SketchUp, and it kind of always will be, and that is that it doesn't draw wall thickness. These are all basically paper-thin exterior walls. And I could absolutely push-pull this outer wall. Let me double-click on the component first, or the group, to push-pull it, and tap Control to make a copy so that I preserve that exterior wall. And I can push-pull this wall in 6 inches. I'll just tap 6 to make it 6. And this works great with the door, because if you remember, I had to create an opening for that door. However, it doesn't work nearly as well for these walls. I'll just double click on it to give it a 6-inch wall thickness. And in fact, I can go around and I'll do that for all the walls, double click on them to create a copy that makes a 6-inch wall thickness. And the problem is, you can see right here, the windows don't go all the way through the outside of the wall. And that's the problem. So what we need to do is, we do need to have this wall thickness, but we need to do it and clean up the mess that we make in creating these walls. Now in this case, I can take this window and the way I created it kind of went with that exterior wall when I copied it. So I'd like to be able to flip the window using the flip tool. It actually distorts the wall just because of the way that the window was created. So instead, what I can do, I'll just edit the window and I'll push-pull the window out to the outer surface of the building. And in fact, maybe I'll push-pull the frame as well. In this case, I'll tap Control so that I get a copy on the outside of the building. And if you think about it, that's actually the way that the frame should look. And now when we spin around to the outside of the building, you will see that familiar Z-fighting. I have two surfaces on top of each other. So what I'll do then is close out of that window component. So now I have to fix this outside wall, and the way I can do that is just draw a rectangle over the glass, and of course I should draw it over the entirety of the glass. So in this case, I think in fact I probably want to draw it over the frame as well so that I can see that that frame. Oops, there we go. And once I've drawn it, I can just select it. And again, I'm selecting the outside of the building. I do have to turn off my section planes. In fact, I could probably just view that elevation and get rid of the surface that way. So we can do this for all of our windows. Again, just double click on the window, push pull, bring it out to the outside. I'm going to tap Control to push pull that window frame out as well. And then go out and clean up those windows from the outside. And you can see both of those windows change because they are a component, and that's what we like about components. And for these circle windows, like I said, you have to just draw a circle. Nice thing is SketchUp will find that center of the circle, so you should be able to draw the circles pretty quickly and delete them. Oops, except apparently that one didn't work. Try it again. Draw the circle in the middle and then out to the end. There we go. I think that should work. And by the way, if you have trouble selecting that circle you just drew, just move the window out of the way. I'm going to move it 24 inches out of the way just by typing 24. Now I can access the circle, delete it, and then move this guy back 24 inches. And this is the nice part about always drawing with axes, is that you can quickly move things and get them right back in the correct position very quickly. The other thing is here I've got my frame. Remember I drew that rectangle, but it was too small. I can just move the frame edge, the opening edge up, and I'm holding down Shift to keep it going in that vertical direction. And now you can see we've cut away the building correctly. Finally, once you've cleaned up all the windows, you will want to clean up these last little pieces here. There are these kind of nubbins that make their way in the interior wall. You can select that inner surface, but it does leave these little lines on the outside. I'm going to want to erase those extra lines and then repaint the outside walls the correct color. So get rid of all these guys. Fortunately, there's no quick way to do these sorts of things. It's just SketchUp doesn't have the ability to kind of heal walls that way. I'll use the paint bucket and use the sample tool to sample the exterior shingles, paint the outside shingle wall on the shingle walls. Then, if you want your plans to look good, you can actually paint inside your walls. You can paint that a nice black color. Or maybe I'll use gray. That will look a lot nicer. Just be sure to paint all of those interior walls, and what you'll find is that if you do happen to see any of them, you'll see them looking correct in your plan and section view. Normally, SketchUp will fill in those sections for you, but sometimes it doesn't work great, so you have to make sure that you paint them the correct color. So our walls are looking pretty nice here. They all have thickness. There is a little peculiar kind of wedge shaped here that is at the top of these walls because we extruded them. We can actually just grab this line and move it straight up, and there it will meet the underside of the roof. So pretty quick fix for that one. Just if it doesn't want to go, mine doesn't want to go, click the up arrow and that forces it to go in the blue direction. Makes a nice clean interior look to it. And then we need to create a basement. Usually we have a basement in our projects, and in this case we already have the underside of the first floor. So I'm going to create the basement the same way we created the wall thicknesses, which is just use push-pull, tap Control to make a copy, and I'm going to push-pull that basement down 8 feet. And now you have a typical thickness, and perhaps we want to give the basement floor some thickness. Basement slabs are not usually super thick, so maybe I'll push-pull it down another 6 inches. Just type in 6. Oh, except I forgot to tap Control first to make a copy. There we go. Now we have 6-inch basement thickness. And how do we create the thickness for those basement walls? Well, we do it the same way that we did it before, using a section. I'll just use the up arrow to force it to stay in section. You can see here right now there's no thickness to these walls. I'll just double click on them. And of course we have a lot of section planes visible, so maybe it's time to get rid of some of those so that we don't have quite so much confusion. And now we can push-pull these outer walls in. Again, probably 10 inches is pretty typical for the thickness of an exterior wall, 10 inches. And when you make your way all the way around, you see how suddenly it doesn't fill the whole basement with this gray solid poche, but instead you can actually see inside the basement. And I can use my paint bucket and I'll just paint it that concrete formwork image here. Of course, I think because one of the surfaces of this basement was painted the outside shingle color, so we want to get rid of that. That's kind of a weird material to have your basement. And just like the walls upstairs, absolutely, you're going to have this kind of extra line, which we could totally just delete, clean up those basement walls. Now, you never see the basement from the outside, so it's not really that important. But those of you like a clean model, you're going to want to clean up every last little bit. And that's how you create your basement. You see look how nice a look that poche is. And that's what your transverse section should look like. Now, there are some things like this ground line. I wish that would come in a lot heavier. We could absolutely make some thickness to the ground, but sooner or later you're going to have to do some touch-up in Photoshop, and that's the kind of thing you can fix in a different piece of software. And I'm going to put in a section going the opposite way, the transverse section, because we usually have both, and hopefully that one will look just as good. And you can see here, it does. It looks great. Now, as I'm finishing up furnishing my plans, and of course putting my furniture and other items on the correct layer, the correct tag, it just occurred to me I forgot to put in the chimney. Wouldn't it be nice to sit on this couch, this beautiful couch, and read by the chimney? And it's pretty easy to draw the chimney now that we've got all these skills behind us. You can just draw a rectangle, and I believe the chimney was 24 by 24. We can even use our offset tool, if we can find it, to, I'll just tap F to offset. And if I remember correctly, it was 4 inches thick. I can delete the center. And of course, I do want to make this into a group so that it behaves itself well. And now when I edit this group, I can just pull it up. I think it was something like 20 feet. So, and now you should see the chimney show up correctly. I can paint it quite easily using my good old paint bucket. There's bricks ready-made here. And because it's a group, it should paint correctly. And I can move it into the correct position in floor plan, which I believe is somewhere right around here. And there you go. That is how you can create the last piece of your model. The last thing you can do to have fun with your model and create some interesting drawings of the hard modeling work you've done is use something called styles. Now, I will warn you, styles can slow your model down. And if you've used trees and bushes with 50 million polygons in them, your model is already pretty slow. So then in which case you may want to stay away from styles. But if you are adventuresome and your model's going pretty quickly, click on the Styles button. And what you'll see, there are all sorts of styles that right now there's only this architectural design style here in the model. But if you click on the Browse button, you can find that there are all sorts of styles, the assorted styles, the default styles, and sketchy edges, hence the name Sketchup. And all you'd have to do to apply these styles is just click on the style itself, and it should turn your drawing into a sketchy view of your model. Now, some of these styles, you can see it actually, as part of the style, it has turned the section plane back on. And you do have the ability to edit this style. Just click the Edit Style button, this little pencil. And there's all sorts of settings that you can have fun with. Things like jitter lines, which make the lines look a little bit more jiggly. You can add in an emphasis on the endpoints, add in profiles, all sorts of fun things. The other thing is here on the model settings, you can control things like whether or not those section planes are on. And that's the one I want to turn off because I don't like that particular look. Then when you click Done, it should remember that style. You see it takes a minute to regenerate. I've already created a model that's a little bit on the slow side. And now that sketchy view is just part of my scenes, I can click this Present button up here in the top of my screen, and you'll see here that it will jump from scene to scene. In fact, I'll put it in full screen mode, and that sketchy view will join with all the others in the presentation. And of course, my computer is slow enough now because of all the crap that I have in this model. So it does take a little bit of time. If it does, you can just tap the Next button and it should jump to whatever your next scene is. And this can be a fun way to present your project. Here's a different style that you can have, a little more kind of hand-drawn look. And again, the program is called Sketchup, and this kind of puts the sketch in SketchUp. And this is also why you sometimes kind of fluff over some of the details as you're trying to get a general scheme for your project together. SketchUp allows you to pretty quickly produce some very nice and stylish drawings all on the web.